Welcome to Grub Grace, where cake is just bread that believes in itself. I'm your host, Mark Flower, and I will be taking on a roller coaster ride of the highs and lows of Joseph in our discussion with a good friend of mine and college buddy, Ryan Parr. Let's dig in. I'm here with Ryan Parr. Today we're going to be talking about Joseph and the story and the dreams that he had, the experiences he had going from the very bottom to the very top, and kind of digging into the themes of that today. First, we're going to kick off with a little post that I found online. But first, we have a little food in front of us, and just talk about the food. We got some grapes, got some flatbread here. We got some sauce. Because of the nature of this podcast, I'm not going to say the name of it. You're free to say it if you want, but we have a little wine in front of us too, and some pistachios and almonds, nice little spread. This is a food podcast talking about the Bible, so it's only fitting to have a little food in front of us.
Absolutely. Got a nice spread going on here. We did it right.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to doing this.
So I'm going to kick it off today a little bit with this post that I found. It's called Things to Teach Your Son, and there's 40 of them. I don't know if I'm going to read all of these. I'm probably just going to post maybe most of them or maybe all of them on my website later. You can check that out on the podcast notes on my website. That is grubandgrace.com. So I'll go ahead and read some of these here. Some of them are kind of a little silly. One of them says, "The man at the barbecue grill is the closest thing to a king." There's another one: "In negotiation, never make the first offer. Request the late checkout," which is, I think it's, that's always a good one.
Yeah.
"You marry the girl, you marry her family." I think that's a great one too. "In all things, lead by example, not explanation." I'm just kind of swiping through these. I'm just going to read a few of these here. "Be confident and humble at the same time. Dress how you want to be addressed. And please and thank you don't cost a cent, but they'll take you a long way." So Ryan, I want to ask you, are there a couple of these, or just one, or maybe a couple that you think are really good examples to kind of live by? And then I'll kind of give you my response after. I want to hear yours though.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm old school. I was raised in the middle of Kansas. We're kind of honky down there. And yeah. So some of these, never shake a man's hand sitting down. It's just a sign of respect. And a little funny story on that one. I don't remember. I was watching a video or something, or I was reading that it came about. And I mean, all cultures greet each other somehow. They grab each other's arm or shake hands or embrace with a hug, whatever. Right. And usually man to man, right, on the handshake. But that in the old Western days, guys would do that, shake each other's hand to make sure they weren't hiding a gun up their sleeve. And it was their way of showing trust to each other. Like, hey, I'm shaking hands with you. No guns coming out, so you're safe here. Like, if I have a gun, you can see it, whatever. So I think that one's interesting for that reason. And then request a late checkout. That one's cool. I took advantage of that a few times in the last couple of years, and it's great. All you got to do is call down. Hey, I'm gonna be leaving a little later, and most places are cool with that. So buy yourself a little time if you're trying to fit something in the morning before you take off.
Yeah, 11's always too early.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's see here. There's so many of these, and all of them are thought provoking. You marry the girl, you marry her family. Now, I'm not married, but I do feel and believe that the girl I will marry, I'm marrying her family as well, because that's a big part of her, obviously, maybe the biggest part of her outside of what our relationship's going to be. And so, if I don't vibe with them and we don't get along, or there's some kind of, rift there, that would be concerning for me personally. So that to me is a huge factor, and vice versa. So if she doesn't get along with my family and isn't accepting and doesn't want to be a part of what we're doing, that would be a huge red flag for me. So that one is a big one. Be like a duck, remain calm on the surface and paddle like crazy underneath.
That was such a good one. I read that. I kind of laughed a little bit.
Yeah. That kind of makes me think about like the fake it till you make it thing, which I don't necessarily agree with that notion. But on this one, remain calm on the surface, which there's something to say for that. I mean, things can be going crazy, but you're keeping your demeanor and, a calm, stoic countenance and still taking life head on, regardless of, what maybe is actually going on. But I always believe in being in touch with reality too, and calling things like they are. Call a duck a duck,
Don't you know it?
Yeah. Were there any other specifically that you were curious about or wanted to chat about? I mean, like you said, there's like 40 here. So
Yeah, I mean, the ones that really stood out to me were eat lunch with the new kid.
I love that.
I've been a new kid before, and I know how scary it is to be like in a new school. I think that's kind of
right.
I mean, this whole list is geared towards what, things to teach your kid. And of course, as they get older and become adults, it'll mean different things. But I mean, I always eat lunch with the new kid. The new kid's scared. Even if he's not scared, it's a good way to help him get acquainted with, the surrounding environment, make new friends, and kind of hurry that up a little bit so that he can find people he can trust, or she, whoever it may be. And I don't know, I just, that one just kind of stood out to me. I think another one that stood out to me was stand up to bullies, protect those bullied. And I know you're a fighter. I'm guessing you probably stood up to bullies before and had to diffuse a situation, or whatever other matters had to be those circumstances. But
absolutely,
I just think that's such an important one. Another one, the give credit, take blame. I feel like not all circumstances, but give credit where credit is due. And if you have done something, you're wrong, take the blame. Don't try to back away and cover it up. Own it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I would love to expound on that one. And, in community and relationships, I think that's one of the biggest things as far as maintaining trust, right? And not just trust in every way. Like, if I know you can be accountable for the things you did wrong, and I don't have to call you out on it, even if I do call you out on it, but when you're quick to know when you did something wrong and can come and be accountable for it, and vice versa, I see that lacking a lot. And, I'm like, man, if we could tap into that a little more, and being okay with understanding this doesn't mean I'm a bad person. I want to be my best person. That's why I'm willing to acknowledge what I did wrong. And I think so many people internalize their wrongdoings and think, well, if I admit it, then I'm admitting I'm a bad person. No, you're self-aware and you're able to unpack that and be accountable to the person that you offended or whatever. And then the, giving credit where it's due, that's always big. Who doesn't want to receive credit for something they did? And so by giving that to others when it's due, that's a blessing to them, and it shows that you care about and notice the things that they're doing and want them to know that, credit is due.
Oh, sure thing. Yeah, of course. Yeah. All right. I think I'm going to talk about this one last one on that list. Write down your own dreams. That one necessarily didn't really stand out to me, but I think, in transitioning from this conversation to the topic at hand, I think it's pretty, spot on with that. Write down your own dreams. Take with it as you may, but we're going to be talking about Joseph, and he had a bunch of dreams in this story. So why don't we go ahead and jump into that? All right. So I want to just kind of lead off with the story of Joseph and just kind of talk about where he is in the story, what happens to him, and then we can discuss a little bit more on the themes on that. So the story of Joseph starts off with Jacob. Jacob has 13 children, 12 sons, 1 daughter. Joseph being the 11th son, Benjamin behind him, already creates a lot of contention because both of them are the favorite sons. So the older sons, because
he had them in such a late age, and so they were, valuable and you kind of an anomaly, so to speak.
Yeah, and also their mother. So he had it with all these children with 4 different wives, so 4 different women. The last woman was his, favorite woman that he had these children with. So of course, the children that she has and bears is going to be the favorite children as well. Naturally. So that creates a lot of hatred, contention with the older siblings, already because he's the favorite. And it just kind of further extrapolates it because he starts having these dreams, and he starts interpreting these dreams in front of his brothers. And I wouldn't say that he's being very humble about this either. He's just kind of throwing it out there. He may have been, with good intention, but basically saying that the sheaves of barley that his brothers are getting from the fields, they all bow down to him in his dream. And he has another dream where the sun, the moon, and the stars all bow down to him too. So 2 different dreams. After these dreams, his brothers want to kill him. Naturally. They think he's pompous. They think he's boastful. And so essentially, he's sent off to the brothers. The brothers see him in the distance. They say, this is our chance. Let's just take him out because we can't stand him anymore. So what they do is they strip him of his clothes and they throw him in a pit by the request of the brother Reuben. Reuben requested that they don't actually straight out kill him because he didn't want the blood on their hands. So they throw him in a cistern, an empty cistern without any water in it, the cistern being a pit.
Yeah, and they say he is actually our brother after all, so maybe we shouldn't kill him. Let's just do the worst possible things otherwise.
So that way he'll die, but not by our quote unquote hands,
right? Which
is still murder.
Right. Almost foreshadows Pilate, right? He wanted to wash his hands of Jesus' blood, although he was really the one sending him to his death. Anyway, I don't know if there's a correlation there, but
no, I think there's plenty of correlation. We can get into that a little bit more. I think we had actually discussed this a little bit before the recording, but yeah, you are totally right. There's a correlation with Pontius, washing his hands clean. There's other correlations with how they decide to bring this up to their father Jacob. They say that they're gonna strip him his clothes. They're gonna dip it in like a lamb's blood that they slaughter right there. And while they're having a meal just not too far away from this pit. They literally just sit down and have a meal after they decide to kill their brother.
Crazy.
And while they're eating their food, some merchants,
Midianites.
That's right, Midianites. Some spice merchants, they come by and they decided to sell their brother to these Midianites
who were on their way to Egypt.
Exactly. Yeah. Joseph being sold into these Midianites, they bring him to Egypt. And he's already kind of gone down to the lowest possible spot that he can go. I actually recently heard this, I forget where it was from, but they were describing the journey of Joseph, where he kind of goes on these roller coasters. He's up high, he's the favorited son, and then he's thrown into this pit. He kind of goes down to the lowest part. He's then sold into slavery, going to Egypt, or not necessarily slavery, but he's brought to Egypt, sold to Potiphar, and Potiphar actually raises him up to be like a servant to him, like an official within his household. And then, of course, Potiphar's wife finds some sort of attraction to Joseph, tries to seduce him. Joseph, being an honorable man, as far as we know of him in the story so far, he says, "No, I can't do this. I'm not married to you, and I'm the servant of your husband." Turns her down. She, claims that he was trying to get at her, and and then he's jailed for this. And so he goes down to the lowest part again. So he's on this roller coaster ride, favorited high. Down to the pit, low, sold to Potiphar, raised up again, and then he's jailed. He's going to the low spots, so he's going to these highs and lows constantly, right. Fluctuating. And so while in prison, this is where things start to turn around for him. He meets the chief cupbearer for Pharaoh, and he meets the baker for the captain of baking for Pharaoh as well. They were jailed for other reasons. He meets them, and he interprets dreams for them. So they had these dreams where. Okay, so the chief cupbearer, it's in Genesis 41:10 or 41:9. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me. On the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed and clustered, ripened in grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." And then the chief baker had a dream. 3 baskets of bread. On the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. So basically, he tells the chief cupbearer that he's going to be raised up and put back in his position. He tells the chief baker that he's going to have his head cut off, pretty much. And so they both are released from prison, and things go exactly as Joseph interprets them. The chief cupbearer is brought back to his position. And when he was interpreting the dreams, he asked him to remember Joseph and to, so 41:14. "But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison." So he tells him to remember him. Well, what happens is the chief cupbearer forgets about him. I think it was like 2 years or something like that.
Gosh.
And finally, he has a little moment. He's like, "Oh yeah, there's this guy Joseph. He knows how to deal with dreams. Let me get him out of prison, and he can come interpret your dreams for you, Pharaoh." So he comes and gets him. They have Joseph shaved and cleaned up, brought before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh tells him of his dreams. And it's the dreams of the cow, the gaunt cow, the skinny cow, and he gobbles up the 7 fat cows. And the same thing with the grain. The shriveled gobbles up the nice full heads of grain. And basically it says that there's going to be 7 years of plentiful, and then followed by 7 years of famine. And basically he says, "Pharaoh, you need to get your act together. You need to find someone that can make an organized effort to store up the grain during those first 7 years to be prepared for the next 7 years of the famine." So Pharaoh's like, you seem like a smart guy. Why don't you join my team?
Which makes him a smart man.
Which makes Pharaoh a very smart man, indeed, because, we see as it follows. They have the 7 years, and they store up all the grain, and they have the famine. And, of course, they have all the grain, available so that they can ration it and be, get through the 7 years just fine. And that brings us to the story where Joseph's father, Jacob, they hear that there's grain in Egypt, and they decide he's going to send his sons, not all of his sons, majority of his sons, as a caravan to go get some grain, some food, and bring it back so that they can have bread and, nourishment, sustenance.
Speaking of, Pharaoh saying the things he did about Joseph, Steve Jobs was quoted as saying, I don't hire smart people so I can tell them what to do. I hire them so they can tell me what to do, right?
Oh, I love
taking care of things on their own. Like, hey, you're smart. I need you here doing whatever you're going to do. And that's something I don't have to worry about, kind of like, Pharaoh's doing here and saying, oh, dude, you know what's going on. I don't even need to tell you what to do. Do your thing, so.
I love this real life kind of relatable to our modern day because I'm still trying to learn this stuff too. And I'm talking to people like you because I feel like you're pretty knowledgeable in certain areas. And, this whole podcast is, it's a learning experience for myself. Like I'm doing this to dig into the word a little bit more, kind of understand it, talk to people that I feel like have something they can impart on to me. If I can impart something, cool. But I'm doing a lot of this research right before these episodes, so
right.
I'm trying to learn. So I love all this info, like the Steve Jobs thing. I didn't even think about that.
Right. I don't know if Steve Jobs was a Bible reading man, but that's pretty neat parallel there. That it's a notion that goes back from probably the beginning of time. Like, and that's, to me, it's a neat thing. Again, community. Like, how can I utilize someone's gifts and skills that I don't have, and letting them be lifted up and promoted in whatever fashion that is, because they can do something I can't, rather than seeing them as a threat, seeing them as useful and giving them purpose and having the power to do that. And by doing that, you're including someone. And I don't know, it's pretty neat.
Oh, definitely. One of the things, the scripture that I always think back to when I'm trying to come up with ideas for this podcast and who to have on it. I'm constantly looking for friends that, I've walked with before and that I can give them something that I'm interested in and glean something out of the conversation that we have. Is the iron sharpens iron. I forget exactly where it was. I feel like I was just looking it up. I forget exactly where it was.
In Proverbs.
That's right. Yeah. I feel like I should do a whole thing on that, but but I feel like that's just such like a foundation for, where my heart is for this whole project. And yeah, it's just such powerful imagery like that.
Absolutely.
So why don't I go? I could continue with the story. I think I might in a little bit, but I think I might just go ahead and go with some of my questions here.
Cool.
I actually added one or two this morning.
Okay.
So one of the questions, and of course, if we don't have any answer, I can crop things out. I can shorten it. I just have all these questions, and
cool. Yeah.
If we have some cool answers, I'll include it. But the first one is, do people still get dreams from God today? And are we good at interpreting those dreams today as it is shown in Joseph's life?
Ooh. In our society, I don't think we see that a lot, right? I mean, you'd be considered a prophet or prophetess if you were getting that and they had major interpretation implications, right? However, I think, I think it's Paul or Peter, somewhere in the New Testament, they talk about, we all have different gifts. Like, you might speak in tongues. This person might have the gift of prophecy, that person, whatever, the gifts of the Spirit. And so I think it does exist. It's not something you see on major media for sure. They're not, oh, this guy's interpreting dreams and telling our president things. And, you're not hearing that. But I definitely think it happens. And I think in places, where there's, I don't know, we're very distracted here, I think, in our society, and I don't think there are a lot of people paying attention to stuff like that or trying to, or even believing that it's possible. And I think that's a huge factor too. If you believe something's real and you practice it and hone it and desire it, you can manifest that. I think, not to get weird or uber spiritual, but I think that's part of it. But you just definitely don't see it a lot, right? I mean, I don't know of a bunch of people running around interpreting dreams, other than maybe psychologists breaking down, Freudian interpretations of what something might symbolize in a dream. But other than that, so yeah, what are your thoughts?
I really don't hear of anybody talking about dreams. I mean, I talk about dreams with my wife. Like, we'll wake up in the morning and she'll be like, I had this really strange dream, or I had a really stressful dream, and she'll tell me about it. And, I'll do the same, from time to time too, but it's not like an everyday occurrence that we even talk about this all the time. It's just kind of like when we have something that really stands out.
Right.
But I almost never have this conversation with anyone outside of my marriage. It's just one of those things that I think we've kind of lost track of talking about with people. And in doing so, we've lost any meaning that could come of it, if God's actually talking to us through dreams.
Right.
I mean, every once in a while, I'll hear of maybe a preacher or like a religious scholar talking about how he got a dream about the president, and or like someone high up, and they're like, oh, they're meant to do this. But I think even that is very rare that you don't really hear about that too much. And even if you do hear about that, it's more just surface level. Like, I had this dream. This is what's going to happen. Right. And you don't really hear about an interpretation of what that could possibly mean. Even with my wife and I, we don't really interpret it too much. Just like, this is a strange dream. Crazy.
Right.
So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah. I did have a girlfriend who would have these like crazy vivid dreams. I mean, just incredible detail, conversations. And a lot of them were about her dad, who had passed away, but growing up was abusive. And, when we were together, she was just coming to know the Lord. And, I'd always had these dreams since his passing, which had been a couple of years. And so we started talking about it. And she was like, oh, I had this crazy dream. And she would just kind of say it in passing. I'm like, well, that's pretty deep. Like, we should unpack that. And like, maybe there's some meaning there. Maybe God's trying to tell you something, And the more we talked about it, and she prayed about it and thought about it, and the dreams kept happening. And it was pretty profound, man. I mean, it opened my eyes to that dreams have a lot of meaning and there's weight to them, and made me believe that I absolutely believe God can communicate to us through our dreams. Why not? People meditate, and God said this to me or prayed, and okay, why can't he talk to us in our dreams? I'm pretty sure there's multiple things in the Bible, related to that. God appeared to me in a dream, right? And so anyway, it was pretty neat to go through that with her, which allowed, as we unpacked it and she prayed through it and thought more about it, there was a lot of healing there because we started putting emphasis on it and paying attention to it. And mostly her, she was just sharing it with me. But I think we believed that was God trying to tell her, one, everything's okay. Your dad's in a good place. Also, he's sorry for what happened. He didn't get to, nor did he take the chance to communicate that to you while he was alive. And that just brought her so much peace, which was really cool to see that just like unfold literally in her life and manifest itself in real ways as she lived her life. And, we went through our relationship. And so that to me was a real life experience with dreams. And we never necessarily had them interpreted, but we definitely believe that God was speaking to her through those and how that was going to influence the rest of her life and how she viewed herself and her relationship with her dad and all these things. So pretty cool.
That was really cool. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So the story of Joseph continues. Of course, his brothers come out. He hides the fact that he's their brother, and I'm guessing, as a second hand to Pharaoh, he's got makeup, he's all made up. Doesn't look like their brother anymore.
He looks like
an
Egyptian.
Of course, he's not talking Hebrew; he's talking the native language, and so he's using an interpreter. So there's no reason for his brothers to assume that he is their brother,
right?
And of course, he kind of plays around with them, he toys with them. He jails one of them, sends the brothers back, and then they have to bring their youngest brother, which their father doesn't want to. It's this whole thing. So he has them keep coming back and forth, just messing with him the entire time. And then, of course, he has grace and forgiveness on him.
Right.
But the question was, do you think that Joseph initially wanted to take revenge on his brothers? And if so, what made him change his gears and have sympathy and show forgiveness in the end?
Right. Yes. To answer the first question, I absolutely think he's a human, right? I mean, you have something terrible like that happen to you. You're left for dead. You're completely abandoned and betrayed by, I don't think Benjamin probably had much to do it, but so 10 of your brothers, right? And, the human in general, I don't know how any human could not feel at least the thought crossed their mind that, oh, I'm in a perfect position to get back at these dudes. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So while it maybe doesn't necessarily specify that, I think, just if we're keeping things on a human perspective and being realistic, I think it had to have crossed his mind. And maybe that's why the many interactions in the games, maybe he was pondering what he was going to do, and he wanted to see them clearly, regardless of what his reasons were, right? This is why he kept having them come back and sending him away, and grabbing Benjamin, wanted to probably make sure he was okay, and to see him for himself. Yeah, I think that absolutely probably crossed his mind.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think there was, like, he was human. The thought probably crossed his mind, and he probably did have a lot of those hurt feelings. When there's hurt done to you, it doesn't easily go away. It's not like you give it 20 years, which I think that's how long from when he was thrown in the pit and sold to when his brothers came out. It was about, that doesn't line up with the famine and everything, does it?
I'm not sure.
Or actually, maybe it does, because he was put in prison with Potiphar. He was there for 2 years. I think it suggested that it's been about 20 years since he was thrown in the pit, 17, and then he was 38 when his brothers came to him. So
that's a lot of time, man. More than double.
That's
his
a lot
life.
of time. And despite that length of time, like you said, he's human. Those things don't just go away. When you see someone from high school, let's say you go to high school, let's say there's a bully or someone that really took advantage of you, or just someone that you just did not like, you just despise, just because of their character. Maybe they didn't come after you, but you just noticed how they treated other people, and you just saw that person as someone you just despise. And then you graduate, you go to college, you have your life, and then like years later, you see that person again. Those feelings are going to come back. I'm sure all of you listeners out there, I'm sure Ryan, I'm sure you feel, have felt that same way when you see someone that has given you a certain feeling in the past. That feeling doesn't go away. It almost floods back in your mind as soon as you see that person.
Right.
And I'm sure that same thought came by with Joseph when he saw his brothers. I'm sure it was a shock. I'm sure he wasn't expecting his brothers to come in. When they came in,
right.
They're like, oh, wow. Like they actually came out here, and it's like, oh, what can I do to these guys? I'm gonna mess with them a little bit. I'm gonna pretend that I don't understand them. I'm gonna have my interpreter. I'm gonna basically send them out, have them arrested, brought back, and just toy with their emotions a little bit, and then toy with, maybe I don't necessarily want to toy with my father. So I'm sure he loved his father. I'm sure he still loved his brothers, but that hurt that they caused him, and he knew that what they did and how they went about it, I'm sure that would just linger.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have to imagine that was the case. And I mean, the Bible would be significantly longer than it is if every, detail of the Bible, someone's countenance and everything they were thinking and every single word that was said was written down and, recorded as in the Bible as we know it, it'd be a lot longer. So all that to say, I feel like we, as humans, we have to fill in the gaps with what's real, and what was potentially happening and these thoughts he might have been having and things he might have said, and that he was pondering these things and probably mixed emotions. What it boils down to, like, oh wow, they were actually right in front of me 20 years later, and do I still feel betrayed? Like, how do I feel about it? I mean, he had a lot going on, right? He was responsible for a lot of things, so that was taking up a lot of his time and his thoughts and his energy. He probably wasn't still sitting around just dwelling on what happened to him. He's got a country to help run, so it's kind of neat to put it in that perspective and still take it down to the most basic human level. And that the dude was probably still hurt, but still had a lot of cool things going on for himself at the same time.
Another aspect of this too. I was listening to a true crime podcast on the way over here.
Nice.
And they don't normally do this, but apparently the story they're talking about had a lot to do with the biblical story of King David having an affair with Bathsheba, and that whole thing, and talking about how this super wise person, had a huge slip up, tried to cover it up, and Bathsheba's husband had tried to bring him back so that he would spend a night with his wife, and then they would say that it would be his child. Of course, he didn't do that, and he had very honorable reasons, and it was just like they make the Bathsheba's husband up to be this super honorable person, like just like. My men are dying on the battlefield. I can't do anything. I want to go back to the battlefield. I want to be with them so that I can try to protect them and try to, show them the way how to get through this battle. And so King David, obviously, keeps being more and more ruthless and trying to cover up his mistakes. But, King David was seen as a wise king. And actually, this is another topic I want to talk about at a later time. Okay. Just, a super wise person that has these major faults. And just because they're viewed as wise doesn't necessarily make them a good person all the time. They might have their moments. They might not. They might just not be a good person at all. They're still seen as wise. The Bible is clear about that. It made David out to be one of the wisest kings. Of course, Saul is the wisest king, but Solomon, yes. And I kind of see that here as well, that, King David was a human. And just because he was seen as wise, he was still human and he still had his faults. Right. Same as Joseph. Joseph was seen as wise. Pharaoh hired him because he was wise, because he had was able to interpret these dreams. He saw that he had God on his side, although I don't think he was without his faults. And,
right.
Just this morning, I came with that kind of connection that I'm seeing that it's all showing us the human side of us. Even though God may be with us, we're still human. Going to the whole topic of the name of this podcast, Grub Grace.
Right.
We still need to show grace on those people. And I think, Joseph learns that halfway through messing with his brothers and his family, right. That, okay, I need to show grace. I love them. And at the root of it, I do love their family. And, right. I need to show grace on them despite of what they did. I need to forgive them. And, it was a journey for him. It wasn't right away. He messed with his brothers, and through messing with them, he found that grace.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. It's a pretty neat representation. I think in this story, along with a lot of others, David's story and whatnot, there's the parallel to Jesus and the prefiguration of Jesus and the foreshadowing of his coming and what the Father's going to do through his sacrifice, right? But also there's parallel to us as humans. Like Joseph was still faulty. He had all these gifts and he found himself in positions of power, but he had also experienced the lowest of lows. And like in those ways, we relate to Joseph as human and faulty and the receivers of the grace, and then other ways we look at the story and we're like, well, he kind of represents Jesus here. And I think there's those two parallels with almost all those stories in the Old Testament. Part of it's relating to us, part of it's telling us who Jesus is and what God's going to do through him, which is pretty cool. He can use that same focal character to send those two messages and to relate to us in both those ways.
And I think it's beautiful that you're bringing, the relationship of Jesus with, the connection to the story of Joseph too. Because like I was mentioning earlier in this episode, is there are so many connections through the story of Joseph that you can see reminiscent in Jesus' life. And I'd love to dig a little more deeper in the next episode too. Next week's episode, stay tuned.
That's right. Come back, y'all.
But I mentioned with being sold and the one that sold out Jesus. Judas selling out Jesus with the
30 pieces
of silver, and even just how they brought up the quote unquote murder, of Joseph being eaten by a lion as right. What they told their father. They dipped his garment in blood, reminiscent of even Jesus dipping the bread in the cup of wine. And I don't want to dig into that too much right now, because that is pretty much, that's a large part of the conversation for this next episode. But like I was saying, there's a lot of connections with that, and I think we can definitely glean a lot of that. And a lot of that isn't necessarily what Jesus taught, although I think a lot of his parables do reflect some of the principles he found in the story of Joseph. But just the story of Jesus' life, you can find a lot of similarities with the highs and lows,
right,
and the happenings of the story of Joseph.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's cool to make those connections, and it's knowing that has helped me read the Bible a little differently. And before I'm just like, oh, these are just a bunch of cool stories that ultimately led to the New Testament, which was Jesus's birth, life, and death, and resurrection. But it's like, no, it's all foreshadowing his coming and what he was going to do. And like you said, we'll get more into that, but pretty cool though to see it that way and know that it's kind of the big setup,
Oh yeah, it's kind of like the cliffhanger.
Yeah. What does this mean? Oh, okay, cool. Thanks, Jesus.
Yeah. All right, one last question. What are some of the symmetry or themes we can extract from the scripture? And I had a note about what about the theme of guilt in particular? Judah feeling guilt and requesting to be imprisoned on behalf of his brothers. So let me give a little backstory with the story of Joseph. So Simeon is jailed first time they go out. They all go back. They tell their father Judah, and this kind of mirrors that. Joseph, I think, was kind of seeing if they would cover up him being jailed and try to lie to his father. They go back. They tell his father the truth. They say that they need to bring back Benjamin. That's what he requested. Judah, of course, doesn't want to do that. He decides that he needs to get his son back, so he decides to send Benjamin, although the risk of doing that. When they bring back Benjamin, he releases Simeon, but then he has a feast, puts his cup into Benjamin's bag. And he's almost doing this in a way to test his brothers to see if they would just pin the blame on Benjamin and try to just be like, nope, he's a favorite son. I don't like him.
Sell him out
like they did Joseph. But he wanted to see if they changed. And I think this is one of the moments that Joseph kind of changed his heart, is when he saw what his brothers did. The brothers actually stood up for Benjamin. And I want to see if maybe the guilt of what happened to Joseph, what they did to Joseph, is, so Judah is the oldest son of the clan, and he's the one that actually is the most outspoken and saying, no, take me instead of Benjamin, jail me, make me a slave, anyone but Benjamin, don't take him, take me. And I'm wondering if maybe the guilt of what they did to Joseph, maybe with him reflecting on it over the years, if that did something to his heart to make him change the way he acted about Benjamin.
I would have to say absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you see the weight of all this and this unfolding, right, and how much of this Joseph's had 20 years to ponder it. And a lot of that time, he was in prison, right? And a good amount of it he spent in positions of power, obviously. But I mean, surely he's going, I'm in this position because of what happened to me and what my brothers did, and so those thoughts have just crossed his mind time and time again, probably a lot of sleepless nights being like, wow, I'm literally laying on a dirt floor in a cold dungeon because my brothers were jealous that my father loved me, like you can imagine how many times that's gone through his head anyway. And then to see them come in and the mixed emotions he was probably feeling, and then to see them, act in a way he probably hoped that they would for him all those years ago, when they rather sold him out. And now here they are standing in the gap for Benjamin, when Joseph set it up. Yeah, I imagine the guilt they felt and the accountability they were taking for, hey, look, we didn't want this, like, don't do this to our little brother. And man, I just imagine that fostered a lot of mixed emotions, but guilt obviously being a big part of it. I imagine maybe they were trying to make up for, well, we could get out of this again, although our father would probably not forgive us if we left Benjamin here, right, and let him take the blame.
Yeah.
And so they're probably thinking wrath of dad over, whatever these guys might do to us. But still, all that to say, they were ready to take the blame, maybe so out of guilt, feeling bad, like, well, we lost one brother and that was totally our fault. We can't let him lose another one. Our dad lose another son, and him be in our hands when that happened, not going to happen. So I imagine guilt was the underlying or overarching rather emotion or sentiment.
Yeah. And, I would think so too. It is really hard to assume these things with the scripture that we have. Of course, we don't want to take it too far out of context, but,
right.
Watching human behavior, human emotion, and feeling it, experiencing it, ourselves, I feel like there's a certain part of that we can apply to the people mentioned in the Bible, in the scripture. I think there is some way to that. I would think that there was quite a bit of guilt, like you said, mulling over it, and just the years of thinking back constantly on what they did to their brother, even if they didn't like him. I'm sure there was still a lot of that guilt that just, it's just human to human crime and sin against one another that, unless you're a sociopath, it's going to impact you deeply. And I would think that would be a big factor in his change of heart.
Right. Well, and these guys, it says Jacob mourned day and night for seeming endless amounts of time. And it says all of his kids came to him, and tried to console him. And he said, nope, I'm going to mourn and grieve until the day I join him in the grave. You have to imagine that was putting some guilt on them, right? They're going, holy crap, what did we do? Look at our dad. We thought he'd get over it because he got ate by a beast and whatever, and no, he's over here wailing and just in complete misery. And you have to imagine that was sinking in with them a little bit. And so again, when they brought Benjamin back, they're like, okay, this guy doesn't leave our sight. He's the next favorite or so, youngest now. And anyway, I imagine that took took a toll on them and was paying dividends as far as how they were acting there and what they decided to do.
Oh, that's a great point. I mean, yeah, it's like you said, the father aspect of it and watching him and how he's reacting over this news would probably be the biggest thing. And of course, that's something we can pull it, directly out of the scripture and say that that's actually, probably a large draw to that. And there's probably so many factors that were in everything at play over these past 20 years that,
right.
Between when they sold Joseph to, when Benjamin was toying with them with the cup and the grain. But yeah, I'm sure there's so many factors that would be there to be present in each of their hearts to try to deal with and reconcile with what they've done with their actions.
Right. Absolutely. And if I may, I think, you consider guilt and consider shame, and those are real life things, right? And they're hard not to feel when we've done something wrong. And I think personally, this is just how I interpret, God's grace and how he wants me to handle those emotions and those feelings is, hey, yeah, I want you to feel remorse for what you did, but I don't want you to stay there. I want you to feel that because I want you to know it's wrong and it's not good for you. Not because, well, you better make sure that I know you feel bad. And then once I know that, I'm going to forgive you. And I think, as Christians and, sometimes in a legalistic society, even in the religious side of it, there's this, well, you haven't done your part unless you feel this real deep, long lasting shame and guilt for bad things that you've done. No, if you understand what you did, you feel guilty. You understand I am at fault. That's what guilt is, right? Like, I know that I did this thing that wasn't right. Okay. I've acknowledged that much. Okay. Well, then there's the shame side of it. I'm ashamed. I am embarrassed, essentially, right? For this thing I did. Okay. That in and of itself isn't a super harmful thing, but when we stay there and we don't lean into the grace that's already been provided for us, that's when those things, guilt and shame, become these toxic things that God doesn't want for us and that he didn't intend, a purpose that he didn't intend for them to serve. And so I think that's important as people of faith, or anybody that might even just be reading the Bible, even if you're not a Christian, you're just trying to explore it and figure it out. Like, when you see these things, to understand, like, grace is always on the other side of that. And if you don't put those together, then you just get the shame and the guilt, and that stays there, and that's heavy, and that's weighted, and it causes effect that is not what the Father God, who is gracious, provided for us through Jesus. And you have to understand it that way. And otherwise, you're just holding on to the one and not receiving the other, which is the grace. So
that was beautiful. So well put.
Thanks.
I think I might end the episode here. Like I said, stay tuned for next week. We're going to be continuing the conversation with Joseph, talking about the connection between the grain and the cup. Like we were talking about, he puts the cup in Benjamin's grain, and the propitiation of Jesus in the cup and wine. And we're going to be talking about connection with that. So please come back next week. Ryan's going to be back on the conversation with us again, and we're going to continue this conversation. So please join us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Mark. This was a lot of fun. See you guys next week.
See you next week.
That's it for today's episode of Grub Grace. I hope you enjoyed our discussion with Ryan Parr about dreams, guilt, and forgiveness. I want to give a big thank you to our guest for joining us on this episode. Music is by Fleece Mob with the song Everything You Need. Graphics and visuals by Root and Branch Creative. Remember to visit our website at grubandgrace.com. That's grub-and-grace.com. As well as our socials on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Until next time, stay curious, keep an open mind, and celebrate the traditions that bring us all together. This week's recipe is a delicious sweet potato pie, perfectly spiced and creamy for dessert lovers. Visit our website for the full recipe and tips to make this classic dessert at home. Enjoy!